Technical problems in first position are going to be magnified in the other positions. The higher that you go up on the fingerboard, the more pronounced the side effects of bad technique are going to be, and the more you're going to hear it in the sound when it comes to bad intonation, bad tone, and bad style. When you're troubleshooting problems with shifting and you're hearing stuff that doesn't sound very good, go back over the fundamentals of tone and intonation in episodes 1 through 3 and make sure that the students are hitting all of those key points in first position and applying them to other positions as well. In addition to that, there are a couple of things that also has to take place during shifting that we don't necessarily see in first position. I'm going to divide this troubleshooting from the left hand to the right hand so that we can kind of separate those two things so that you can know what to look for in each hand, and it just makes it easier to organize this information. So starting with the left hand, the first thing that you have to worry about is the thumb and making sure that the thumb is moving with the rest of the hand. It's very common for students to leave the thumb behind and shift the rest of the hand up, especially in the higher positions when they tend to reach up the fingerboard like they're trying to get the last Pringle out of the Pringles can. It's a tricky thing to do, but you want to avoid that. You want to make sure that they have tabletops and that the thumb is coming with the rest of the hand so that they can press down the fingers firmly and get a good sound and play in tune. It might be to your advantage to get yourself into an angle to where you can see your students' thumbs, and for the violinist and violist, you can kind of see the thumb peeking around the fingerboard, but for cellos and basses, you shouldn't see the thumb peeking around the fingerboard, and if you do, that's going to be an issue. So you might want to stand behind them or to the side of them just to make sure that the thumb is moving along with the hand. For violinists and violists, the thumb typically moves along with the first finger, and for cellos and basses, the thumb moves even with the second finger on the other side of the neck of the instrument. In the upper positions, that's not going to hold true because the upper bout kind of blocks the hand, and so you're going to have to get the thumb out of the way. So for low strings, the thumb is going to come out, and then eventually you're going to transition into thumb position. And for the upper strings, you're going to need to bring your elbow under and let the thumb come around the fingerboard. Otherwise, it's going to get blocked by the upper bout, and you're going to be reaching for everything, and that's not going to be good. 9 times out of 10, the biggest issue with leaving the thumb behind is because the students are squeezing the neck up here, squeezing the neck down here, and the thumb is squeezing so hard that it doesn't move along with the rest of the fingers, or it would be choking the player in the instance of the violins and violas, or maybe the hand doesn't even move at all because we're squeezing so hard. So I would recommend as a troubleshooting step just to take the thumb away for a little bit when they shift. Just pull the thumb out, shift, make sure the thumb's not in position so that we can't squeeze, and then add it back to have the thumb lightly touch the neck of the instrument. Anything that we can do to prevent squeezing, the thumb flapper exercises, the pull-up exercises, anything that we can do to help create space where we need to and make sure that the students aren't squeezing the neck of the instrument, because that's really going to be harmful for shifting. This may not be something that students are going to be able to master in a day, and so you're going to have to reinforce and reteach and eliminate the habit of students squeezing, and you just got to be patient with it and give them some time. The other issue that is extremely common with students when they're shifting is collapsing the fingers, and some of it again is just because they're reaching for the notes instead of moving with the whole hand, bending from the elbow or from the elbow and shoulder. And so their fingers tend to collapse. And sometimes they're doing everything correctly and they start to collapse anyway. And they weren't doing it in first position, and that skill doesn't carry over for some reason. So you just have to remind them to play with rounded fingers. I like to use the coaching cue tabletops and do exercises like finger flexors to get them to build up to where they're playing on the fingertips. The higher a student plays up on the fingerboard, the more of a problem that collapsed fingers is going to be, because The gaps in between the notes get smaller and smaller as we move up the fingerboard. This is because music is not linear. On the staff, it's linear. We see stepwise motion and it goes up in a linear manner. But in the real world, in physics, it's logarithmic. And so as we go up the fingerboard, those spaces get smaller and smaller in between notes. And if we're collapsing the fingers instead of playing on the tips of the fingers, we have more flesh on the string, which provides less accuracy. It's like instead of painting with a fine-tipped paintbrush, we're using a paint roller, and that's not going to give us the detail that we need. And so intonation problems are going to be exacerbated the higher we play up onto the fingerboard. So watch and make sure that the students are shifting with the whole hand. There's a school of thought in cellos and basses that when we shift, it's advantageous to lead with the elbow, and that gets the whole weight of the arm going so that there's quicker shifts and more accurate shifts happening. So you might want to try that too. But if they're shifting with the fingers and not with the whole hand, you're going to end up with more finger collapsing. So the way to identify that issue is to watch visually, make sure they're shifting with the elbow and the shoulder instead of just with the fingers or wrist. And you also want to correct it by having the students build up to the tabletops and make sure that they're shifting correctly. Just a side note for violinists. Sometimes in the upper positions, or even for some students in third position, if their fingers are thick enough, when they're playing half steps, it's going to require them to push the finger out of the way if they're taking a half step. So, if they're going from second to third finger and they're creating a half step, we're going to have to use that third finger to push the second finger out of the way to get a true half step. And we see this a lot in an augmented or some books call a 3-4 pattern, where we go from 4 to 3, like at the end of D major scale, for instance. We have C sharp to D. We're going to need to push that C sharp out of the way to get a true half step up to D. So just be aware of that. Some students have pretty thin fingers, some students have thicker fingers. Eventually, we get high enough, and everybody has to do that to create half steps. When we shift, we must shift with both hands. And remember, tone always comes before intonation. So if we can't have a good enough tone to be able to hear what we're doing, it's going to be really hard to play in tune. The higher you shift up on the fingerboard, the closer we need to play to the bridge, because we need to change the waveform accordingly. Now, if you're playing too high or too close to the fingerboard, it's going to give you a really nasally sound in the upper positions. So make sure to change bowing lanes and play closer to the bridge the higher you play up the fingerboard. If you're thinking about phrasing and you're thinking about shaping, you don't really want those big color changes to occur when you're shifting up. You want to retain the same tone quality so it's not such a distraction in the phrase. So that's one reason to play closer to the bridge. But also, if the tone gets too out of hand, and it gets too nasally, it's really going to be difficult to hear in tune. If the whole section is doing it especially, it's going to be really hard to find the pitch center if we're making a very rounded blending tone. For right-hand issues, listen to the sound, and if you hear the tone sounding a little bit bizarre, then you might want to check bowing lane and experiment with that and try to get the bow into a better spot so that they're making better sound. Now, I have a demonstration exercise in one of the upcoming videos in this series to teach the students how to shift with both hands using the harmonics, and you can modify it however you need to for your orchestra, but at least it'll give you a base to start with if your students are having trouble changing bowing lanes when shifting. Just to summarize, what you want to do is make sure that the left-hand technique is more or less the same as it is in first position. The fundamentals should still be there. If they're not, you need to reinforce those, and you can use some of the same exercises in any position to be able to play with the correct left-hand shape and technique. And you also need to watch out for the bow, because the bow needs to change a little bit when we shift up, and we need to move closer to the bridge. Otherwise, we're not going to be making a good sound, and it's going to be really hard to tune, and that's going to be an issue. So we want to have the students play with great tone when they're shifting, because we want them to be confident. and we want them to be able to have good hand shapes so they can press hard enough so that they can play in tune and get good tone, so that the string resonates correctly and vibrates the right way, so that they can make good sound, they can hear what they're doing, they can play in tune, and then that's going to give them confidence when they play in different positions and they're shifting around, rather than being scared of it. And being scared of it's going to create this negative feedback loop where it's like, oh no, I sound bad, and so the technique's going to get worse, the bow speed's going to drop, they're going to start playing in a higher bowing lane to kind of try to hide themselves, and all of that stuff is going to be not good for developing the technique that we want in the upper position. So get them started with good technique first. Again, try to work from simple first to complicated, and I have some demonstration exercises at the end here to break down those skills so that they can sound better and develop that confidence and play with good technique. Ultimately, in every rehearsal, what we want to do is make our students challenged at some point so that regardless of their ability, somebody is always being challenged. And at the same time, we have to create a comfort level so that students who are not quite caught up with the rest of the class, they feel good about something they did during that rehearsal. So try to find an exercise or two where everybody can shift and make it challenging enough for the more advanced students in your class, and then pick some other exercises that are easy enough for other students in your class, and you don't have to spend all day on them, just 30 seconds or something like that. And that way everybody feels successful and everybody is making progress. You don't want anybody slipping through the cracks, especially not on shifting, because the consequences as they move from middle school to high school, or from high school to college, or community orchestras, or whatever they go on to, if they don't develop the necessary shifting skills, it's really going to limit what they're going to be able to do. And we want students to stick with music for the rest of their lives. We don't want it just to be a thing that they do with us in our class. We want this to be a lifelong adventure. So I hope you found some of this information helpful. In the next video, we're going to talk about accountability.